Hello, everyone, and welcome to the NowSecure Tech Talk for December. My name is Brendan Hahn. I'm Senior Product Marketing Manager here at NowSecure, and I will be your host for today. I am joined by Steve Marriott, a Senior Pen Tester from Humana, to talk about the balancing act of collecting data and third-party privacy. A few very quick housekeeping items before we start. We will have Q&A at the end of the Tech Talk today, so please feel free to ask any questions you have using the Q&A Zoom feature. We also have chat enabled during today's session, so you can throw questions in there as well. A recording of this session will be sent to you via email and will also be available on NowSecure Academy. NowSecure Academy is totally free to sign up for. This is our last Tech Talk of 2023. So I wanted to start off by thanking everyone who has registered throughout the year and who have joined these sessions live. All of the replays from the entire year are available for free on NowSecure Academy, so be sure to check those out. And I'm excited to share that we are planning on continuing the Tech Talk series into 2024. So keep an eye out for our announcement around our January session. With that, Steve, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. Yeah, hello, everyone. I'm Steve Marriott, and today we're going to be talking about mobile third-party analytics and what we do for testing and identifying and looking at the data that's being shared with these third parties. So let's get into it. So real quick introduction here. So I'm Steve, hello. And as Brandon said, I'm currently a senior penetration tester. I have about 26 years experience in IT, last 7 pen testing mobile apps. I've also been a NowSecure user during that time, all the way back to just about when things were, the Santoku Linux and VLab. Yeah, I have a MSI IT. I have a couple certs. And I always like to say that I'm not a mobile developer. I just test and break things. Sometimes intentionally, sometimes not. So just a quick overview of what we'll be talking about today. So, of course, the talk is about third-party analytics. We'll start with a background and overview. I'll talk about what I do when I do static and dynamic testing for third-party analytics. I'll give some recommendations. And of course, these are highly dependent on your organization. Some of these items may be a bit more difficult to implement if you're in a smaller organization. But, I'll give some general ideas and recommendations, and you can fit that to your own org. And then, of course, question and answer. Okay, starting with background overview. So what are third-party analytics? So, I always like to say that third-party analytics may be overlooked when testing mobile applications. There are services used for analytics, advertising, crash reporting, and sometimes A/B testing when using new features and seeing how your users react to them. It's helpful to know how users are using your application or where errors are occurring. And obviously, it's easier for mobile apps to use a third-party service versus developing something in-house. When I said, I think this is overlooked, because a lot of times I feel, you're looking at the application itself and the first-party APIs that the application uses. And sometimes, and I've done this too, you just kind of ignore all the third-party requests that are happening in the background. Another thing too, so my personal experience, analytics usage seems to be higher within consumer-focused apps or consumer-oriented apps, such as games or maybe some more like questionable apps. And what I mean by that are like the, the system tool apps, brand boosters, or, like some oddball chat app and so forth. So most of us, I would assume most of us are using enterprise applications. So I found that, well, those will use analytics, but nowhere near the extent of, say, like a game. So why is this important? So organizations such as my own will typically utilize a combination of in-house and third-party applications. Your audience may be employees, customers, or members. Sensitive data, such as PII, PHI, etc., may be subject to data leakage via analytics. And I mentioned inferred PHI, and what I mean by that is, let's say, data is being sent to analytics, and it includes maybe your name, IP address, and a search query. Maybe you're looking at information about cancer or, another health condition. You can infer from that individual probably has cancer. So, it may not be direct, but you can infer a lot with the data. So also, we have to be concerned about regulatory and privacy laws. The best example of this is the California Consumer Privacy Act, which is now, I guess they renamed it to the Privacy Rights Act, with some additional, or they changed things a bit and renamed it. Also with GDPR, I personally don't deal with any apps that are based in the EU, but within your organization, you may. And these are important because there's requirements within like CCPA and GDPR regarding respecting opt-out requests from consumers, regarding sale and sharing of personal data, or asking for consent for data collection. So, the benefit for, especially for like my company, we're in the US, but, we're, even though we may not necessarily, or your application may not necessarily do business within California, or maybe you're nationwide. These laws are good because it's much easier to implement, like, say, like an opt-out for everyone versus figuring out, oh, okay, this user is in California, so I'm going to do this. It's easier to implement across the board. So in a way, just about anyone can benefit from these laws, even though they may not reside within California. So, another important question to ask is really, like, how do these analytic companies store and handle this data? Do they claim it's anonymized? Which you've probably seen reports that, like, if you have enough data points and data sources, you can de-anonymize that data. Are analytics being combined from multiple apps? So for example, like, do you have a health app and a social media app on your phone, and they're both using the same third-party analytics provider? Are they combining that data to get a better picture of this particular user for advertising? And then what are the data retention policies? Also, is that data segmented? Is your company's data and your users, are they just lumped in with everyone else? Another thing to consider too is, applications and or SDKs may collect everything. Like in its default configuration, it might say, I want all the data, or it could be due to misconfigurations that, you're collecting data that shouldn't be collected. There was a breach back in 2017 regarding, one of those custom keyboard apps, and they had a data breach, and analytics as well as the keystrokes that people were typing into the application were captured, and that was part of a data breach. So yeah, so when you think of data breaches, like, well, what information could be exposed from, if a breach were to occur? Okay, now let's get into some of the things I do in regards to testing, both for static and dynamic analysis. So what do I look for when I test? I'm very concerned about what sort of sensitive personal and device identifiers are being sent to a third party, such as device IDs, Android advertising ID, or iOS's IDFA identifier, IP addresses, Wi-Fi network names, as well as session IDs or other identifiers. So I'm also looking for sensitive information such as PII, PHI, and PCI data, data entered into form fields, screenshots, search terms, etc. So one thing to note, when I test, I'll look at analytics as like just another part of my test. Um, I'm typically not doing assessments where I'm only looking at analytics. It's just, I do it in parallel to my other testing. So, testing what to look for when we also talk about third-party analytics. I'm interested in how that endpoint is configured. Of course, outright attacking the API endpoint is probably not allowed or part of your scope. So, I'm not doing anything like, fuzzing or, looking at rate limiting on the API, et cetera. But there are some things that we could do passively to at least get an idea about the the security of that API endpoint. I'll typically do a scan, usually with Qualys SSL Labs. I'm a big fan of to look at TLS settings and misconfigurations. I'll look to see if it's possible to downgrade a request to HTTP, or are they using HTTPS? Are they using, strict transport security to ensure that, that request is always over HTTPS? I'll also look for the approximate hosting location of this API. I'm a big fan of DNS Dumpster for this point, and depending on your organization, there may be issues if your data may be hosted in a particular area or jurisdiction that you don't want. For example, like if you're in Europe and those APIs and that data is stored within the US, there may be issues there depending on your organization. So also with testing, not all requests of third-party analytics will be easy to observe. There may be encrypted requests. And of course, you may not be able to discern what exactly is being shared. Data can be encoded. I've seen that before, usually base 64. So when you look at your search terms, you want to make sure that you're also looking for, say, like that value, with base 64 encoding. I'm always interested in HTTP GET requests. So data in query string parameters could be captured in logs or potentially viewed. And this goes for HTTP post. You could still pass data over the query string even in a post request. It may not necessarily appear in the message body. So parameters also may have nondescript names. I came across one test where the parameters were all PV underscore A01, etc. It may not be an indication of what actually is being collected. So using unique inputs can help here. For example, when I do my testing, if you're a fan of the TV show The IT Crowd, I always use the word Tenetaba as a search term because that's unique enough that if I see that in, requests or stored on the device or whatever, I can figure out, oh, okay, that's because I entered this here in this form field. So it's always good to have like a unique search term or search terms in order to be able to tell, where that data originated from. Okay, so now going on to static analysis, just the caveat that when I do testing, I'm typically not looking at analytics itself. When I do static analysis, because it's kind of difficult to, and you'll have better luck with dynamic testing. But if you were to use static analysis, typically I'll load the APK into bytecode viewer, which I absolutely love. If you don't use it, definitely look at it because it allows you to use different decompilers. So, you could have JADX and JDGUI and, Fernflower, whatever, all next to each other, because each one decompiles the app a little differently. Probably the easiest thing is to run the APK through Exodus Privacy. And I have a screenshot here on the side. It's really good to get a quick, okay, what analytics or advertising is being used within this app. Just go in with the caveat that the results may not be accurate. It's only going based on code signatures. I've seen it before where, it looks like it's using all sorts of different trackers, but in reality, it only uses, 5 or 6 of those. So iOS is much more difficult. You can, unzip the IPA, do manual inspection. You could try to do binary inspection in Hopper. This is really difficult. So when you're looking at analytics, I would say just look at Android because typically the Android and iOS versions will use the same analytic platforms. So, it's easier to do this with Android. But really the benefits will come with dynamic testing. Okay, so for dynamic analysis, yeah, the best thing to do is to proxy your mobile device via, burp, zap, minim proxy, whatever you prefer. I'll do this and I'll passively observe all those third-party requests. Typically, mobile apps will not have certificate pinning on these endpoints. I don't think I've ever encountered that because typically you don't know what their certificate rotation schedule is like or, when that'll update. So apps, it'll probably break things if you try to pin against that. So yeah, typically I don't see cert pinning on those APIs. So also keep in mind for hybrid apps or apps that is just a container for a web app, make sure you look at the underlying web app and the related requests. Also, this is where I like to use NowSecure Workstation search terms. So it's very easy to identify when sensitive information is found during network tests, and then also with stack analysis. So, in my search terms, I'll add all the device identifiers, Wi-Fi names, usernames, IP address, etc., and my unique keywords, as part of my search terms. Okay, so now let's talk about recommendations. And again, as I mentioned, depending on your organization, some of these may be applicable, some of them not. Some of them are much more difficult to implement. So my first recommendation is to require a software bill of materials. And I really, really like SBOMs, and I like how this is also part of NowSecure platform. And with this, make sure that all third-party analytics are being documented, what their purpose is, and what data is being collected. And of course, if you discover in your test that it's no longer being used, remove from SBOM and from the apps. And then, always make sure that those SDKs are at the latest version. So you can also, through policy, restrict certain sensitive data types from being shared and make sure that you have a process for exceptions. Consider creating a risk register or utilize your current risk register, such as like the, NIST has a lot of resources available for creating a risk register. Talk about the description of the risk, the impact to the business, probability of its occurrence, risk owners, etc. So another policy recommendation is to require member and customer facing applications to implement opt-out settings. So these settings should be easy to find. They should not reset after app updates. I do recommend having separate settings for analytics and crash reporting. And when I do my dynamic testing, I always check to see if the setting is being honored. And then I check to see if it's being reset when the application updates. This last point is bad because a user might think, oh, I've opted out, but they do an update and the setting has reverted. So in-house applications that are used for enterprise or business use, you may have a legitimate need for analytics. So in those cases, I do say that the opt-out setting can be optional. And the reason why I say that is because for those apps, you're doing work on behalf of the business rather than having it be an individual consumer app. So just an idea here for how to do analytics but avoid sending sensitive data is to consider using analytics only identifier, either through tokenization or using a hash of that particular value to identify users and or sessions. And this is also really helpful in cases where that data is going to be brought back in-house for further analysis, because you could do that join against your users or sessions in order to, identify certain types of users or however you're doing the analysis. And finally, for vendor due diligence, when you're dealing with application used in the enterprise for work purposes, ensure that your organization has appropriate agreements in place, and policies and, master service agreement, et cetera, to really understand how those third parties are going to be using that data, how it's collected, and so forth. So, yeah, so a quick summary here. So again, this is a balancing act. We want to focus on minimizing risk and exposure from third-party analytics, but yet we still need to allow business to function. And that can become really, really difficult to accomplish because, business will want certain things, and, then when you deal with user privacy, other privacy laws, et cetera, they may be at odds. So know what your mobile applications are doing with third-party analytics. Have that documented, have that inventory, whether it's through software bill of materials and or risk register. I like to say, like, as a pen tester, my job is to identify and report on risk and provide that information to other groups to act upon that. So, as an analyst or as a pen tester, yeah, definitely be sure to identify and report on everything you find. So for consumer-facing applications, make sure you give the options to disable analytics. And then from a policy standpoint, make sure those policies and recommendations are aligned with the organization. Okay, so thank you. That's the end of the talk. And we have time for some questions and answers. I know that was a lot to get through, but in about 20 minutes.
Steve, that was awesome. I
Thank
feel
you.
like you covered it really well. I'll remind folks on the line, if you have any questions, feel free to throw them in the Q&A box or in chat. We'll pitch them there. We do have one that came out already around strategies you use to personally protect your privacy. So are there steps that you take to block analytics for you personally?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I personally like to block all analytics. So I use a combination of I use Firefox and use uBlock Origin to block ads and analytics. I also employ DNS filtering. So you could do that either by running a Pi-hole at home, either on a Raspberry Pi or within a Docker container. And I also use a service called nextdns.io, and that makes it real easy to add DNS filtering to your devices. So what's nice is I use Android, so you could just use the private DNS setting that's in Android 9 and above to do that. And then on iOS devices, you can implement it with a configuration profile. But yeah, it's a real great service. I personally love it. I use it. So
That's awesome. Cool. All right. It looks like there are no questions, which means you just crushed it, Steve. So
that's good.
appreciate it. Folks, thank you so much for joining today and for joining all the sessions throughout the year. As we said at the top, you'll receive a replay of this session to your email, and today's sessions and all of the other sessions from the year are available for free on NowSecure Academy. Steve, I wanted to again say thank you so much for hosting today. This was super interesting, really spectacular talk. And with that, folks, have a great rest of your year. We'll see you in January.
Hey, thank you.
Thanks all.